You're listening to Season 10 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 to today.
We are thrilled to be joined once again by our environmentalism consultant, Colin. Colin, welcome back to the program.
Hey, it's good to be back.
We talked with you around the middle of the Victory season to discuss how Tomino's ideas about the environment were showing up in this show. And now that we have reached the end of Victory and actually reached the end of a just epoch-making run from Tomino, 20 years of non-stop output, much of which did involve at least what appear to be environmentalist themes, we thought it would be a good idea to bring Colin back onto the program and look back at all the Gundam we've covered and talk in a comprehensive kind of way about the environment as depicted in Tomino's work. But maybe we ought to start by asking, based on his work as a writer and director thus far, is Tomino an environmentalist? Or is that an assumption that we have projected onto his work because of interviews we've read or other people's commentary or even just our own prior biases?
In a discussion where we are asking, is Tomino an environmentalist, we probably have to define what we mean by environmentalist.
That sounds really hard, which is why we brought in an expert to do it for us. Colin, what is environmentalism and what makes a person an environmentalist?
So the fun part about this is that it's a very simple answer. It's kind of like the what is art question. But I'm going to get a little bit deeper onto a couple other terms that'll probably help with the conversation here. An environmentalist is just somebody who wants to protect the environment. Somebody who wants to ensure that water is drinkable, air is breathable, healthy populations of different species can exist with as limited amount of kind of effect from human civilization as possible. If that seems like a know-nothing definition, it's because it kind of is. And so to kind of get into it, I think looking at the way that environmental activist groups work, I think there's kind of two terms that we can dig a little bit deeper on that will be useful for a conversation about Tomino. And that's the difference between a conservationist and an environmental justice advocate. So conservationist is, I don't want to sound too disparaging about it, but it has baggage from, the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is very much the Teddy Roosevelt school of approaching the environment.
That we should preserve the natural world so that we can go out and kill some of it ourselves. And so that our children still have some to kill themselves if they want to.
Yeah. But with conservationists, it's very much about the natural state of nature. Definitely there's still, I know people who identify as conservationists that still care about clean drinking water and clean air in cities. But by and large, it's about, keeping untouched natural beauty of nature. You see a lot more animal rights activists under this umbrella. And it is important to and especially the ways in which that movement kind of sticks more up for rural communities, farming communities, making sure people who have land skills are at the forefronts of these conversations. But the downside to that approach is this kind of city versus nature kind of bias that's kind of inherent to it. Mm-hmm. And then your environmental justice approach is about viewing people as a part of nature, viewing cities and urban areas as natural environments that we live in, and focusing on the ways in which human pollution affects and compounds on minority groups, poor communities, and trying to do something to change that to make sure that we're not writing off sections of the environment because they've been touched by civilization. And, looking at things like whether it's, a rural farming community that in order to get their local taxes has to host a big landfill, or, an urban neighborhood that because it's near a major industrial corridor has really bad air quality. While I feel I'm more of an environmental justice person than a conservationist, it's also worth pointing out that it's really hard to get somebody who's focused on environmental justice to care about endangered species. It's kind of like, oh yeah, of course I care about manatees and whales and wolves and stuff, but it's like never a thing I'm going to go and advocate for at my General Assembly, sadly. And I definitely got into this on the last episode I was on, is it's kind of the divide between whether you kind of idealize this kind of like pure natural form, or if you're willing to see nature in even the most clinical, industrial place that you could possibly be.
So another way of putting this maybe is that for the environmental justice advocate, you say, humans are here, we are part of the environment, we should find a compromise between our needs and the needs of the environment. And then the conservationist would say, well, but what if humans weren't here? What if they were over there, far away?
Yeah, exactly. So what do we think Tomino is? And then there's actually a funny kink that gets thrown into this with Tomino. And I think especially up to Char's counterattack, Tomino like touches on conservationism and touches on nascent like environmental justice ideas. But I think mostly the thing that he's really focused on for especially 0079 and Zeta is just the effects of war on the environment. And I think there's a bridge he eventually jumps as he like continues on that metaphor and like the show is developed. But I think especially First Gundam is that's just about the ways that bombs destroy the environment, like flat out.
When I was trying to kind of sum up what I think of as Tomino's stance, or what Tomino says about the environment across all these series, is basically that human activity, and especially warfare, does massive amounts of harm to the environment, and that's bad. That is regrettable.
Maybe this will be controversial, but I actually think a lot of the environmentalism that we read in Tomino's earliest works is not a particular concern for him at that point. He acknowledges that there is this environmental catastrophe looming over humanity, but he then says, and what would the effects of that be? Because of the environmental crisis, because of humans' rapacious overconsumption of resources and overpopulation, which is the thing he really never quite gets over, humans were forced to move out into space. It creates these artificial and very toxic hierarchies as people hoard the resources, the natural resources like the planet Earth itself that are available to them. And then as a natural result of that, war happens.
And then at the same time, the environment is, like civilians, one more kind of collateral damage in warfare itself. They make a point of depicting these really lush environments. We joke about Tomino animals every time some small group of animals appear in a scene. But in addition to adding visual interest to an animated scene, those animals remind us other living things exist in these spaces. Other living things are being affected by the war that's being depicted.
Yeah, it's another tick box in the reasons that war is bad. And I think as Tomino kind of shifts to making environmentalism like more of a theme in Gundam, I think it's hand in hand with his developing fascination with the war economy too. Because we basically, like, the most we see of that in First Gundam is what, Makuve running around mining mysterious rocks and collecting vases. But then, Zeta brings in, Anaheim Electronics and like so many other moneyed industrialists that are showing up behind some of these political movements.
And in Zeta, you actually get this idea that the ultimate goal of the Titans is to exhaust the entire Earth sphere's economy through war in order to force people to leave the planet behind.
Yeah, and in Double Zeta, we finally get to see how normal people live. We finally get to see life inside of a colony for 10 episodes. We get to see, a Xeon asteroid mining like company like living and working. This ultimately culminates in Char's counterattack, which I don't know how much. Do we want to put like a stop clock on whenever we decide to relitigate Char's counterattack again?
Let's simply not.
Yeah. Agreed.
But as a matter of environmentalism, I think Char's counterattack actually represents a break point for Tomino, because up until then, the environment has principally been treated as one component of the overall social and political situation in the Earth sphere. The bad environment feeds into the bad political situation, which feeds into the military situation, which feeds into the environment situation. It all keeps going around and around and around. In Char's Counterattack, for the first time, you get the idea that apart from all practical considerations, the Earth and the environment are sacred. That there is a spiritual value to them which doesn't really enter into any other calculations.
Yes. It is the linchpin for the thing that we're going to do to end the war. We're not going to fire a big laser at the enemy fleet or anything. We're going to drop a big nuclear rock on Earth so that we can't live there for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And there are two... Oh gosh, now we're relitigating the movie. But there are two interpretations of that, actually, right? One is that it will destroy the environment, and the other is that it will save the environment.
Yeah. We should put a pin in Char's Counterattack because I just listened to the wonderful Game Studies Study Buddies podcast cover Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, and we don't need to get into a 45-minute discussion about accelerationism
Sure.
right now. As
Putting
much
a
as
pin
I want
in it
to.
is a good metaphor because it is a grenade that will explode in the middle of conversation.
Yeah.
So put that pin back in.
Yeah. But yeah, I think 0079 is great, but it is, I don't want to say it's definitely not shallow, but it is very pointed about what it's about. And then each subsequent work kind of builds a wider breadth of like looking at the effects that war has on society, which allows to worm in on things like environmentalism, mental health, social class, religion, like all of these different things and how they interact together and how they're affected by war and then go on to affect politics and war itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of nice for this conversation that then Char's Counterattack just kind of like bottlenecks it all back in. We're going to have Char say, thank you, Mother Earth, we're getting off you now. And then we can kind of move into like this next phase of Tomino's career, which is where I have to ask y'all, I'm not an F91 scholar. I've not dug into the F91 novels. Is there anything going on there? Because I just remember buzzsaws cutting people in half.
Well,
I mean, they take place entirely in the colonies. And so there's a sense of kind of being divorced from Earth environment entirely.
The only view we get of the Earth environment is the Federation official on the beach being like, we'll just let the colonies fight it out themselves. Though, again, in that film, the purpose of the bugs is ultimately that they should be sent to Earth to exterminate the population there so that the population can be reduced to a livable level, which is always the bugbear. And there is a moment in the conversation between Cecily and her grandfather when they're walking around the beautifully sculpted artificial hills of the colony where I believe he says that people who are trying to go back to Earth are foolish and wrong because the planet isn't ready for them yet. That they need to leave the planet completely alone for generations to give it a chance to recover.
It's one of the fun contradictions of Tomino's work, and there are so many, but that he clearly buys into this idea of carrying capacity, that like neo-Malthusian, we have to be careful, there's too many people on the planet. And yet, it's always his villains who try to do anything about it. It's always the villains who are like, okay, so we'll just kill a whole bunch of people and then everything will be fine, right?
Yeah, it's especially interesting in like this time period to think back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, because Japan was going through kind of the same kind of problems that America was going through at the time. Like environmental justice as a term doesn't really start getting used. Like I want to say like the first environmental justice convention doesn't happen until 91, if I'm remembering my history correctly.
I'm trying to remember when that one village in Japan got horribly mercury poisoned.
That was, oh, buddy.
'Cause that was
I was
a big
just,
one.
like,
That was
reading up last night about this. Yeah. It's like that and like the Osaka Reservoir finding out that it had like huge amounts of phosphorus in the water. But like very similar to like America's like creation of like the Superfund system.
Mm-hmm.
There is this acknowledgement of the effect that like industrial pollution is having on people and that the government needs to step in and do something about it. but it still seems like all of the discussion around it seems incredibly localized. Like, this is a problem, but it's a problem for that specific Japanese village. And it's weird to to have like all of these ideas about like overpopulation. Is that an issue kind of swirling around in these developed countries that are starting to have like plateaued birth rates? It definitely seems like a fear of the developing world and their control over it.
It casts the main environmental problem as something that those developed countries don't actually have to do anything about. Because if the problem is overpopulation and your population is shrinking, well, then...
Yeah, I wish I could find it again. I never got a chance to bring it up last time I was on, but I found this really interesting survey of the Japanese population from the early 90s about their feelings on environmentalism and conservation and pollution and stuff in the wake of the 1992 Global Earth Summit. Countries are all over the globe getting together to talk about pollution and the ways it's affecting oceans and developing countries, all these kinds of things. And the survey, I'm remembering these statistics off the top of my head, so I don't have hard numbers. It's a lot of people saying they're concerned about species endangerment and extinction. They acknowledge that, like, as a developed nation and an industrial and economic leader in the world, it's their responsibility to help guide better pollution controls in other countries. It's, a lot of concerns about personal waste and making sure that, you're putting as little waste into the system as possible as an individual.
And thankfully, ever since that conference in the mid-90s, individual consumption of things like single-use plastic containers has dropped dramatically, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All of our concern about personal decisions has led to an environmental renaissance, right?
Yeah. Definitely recycling wasn't kneecapped by making it a locality responsibility instead of a responsibility of plastic polluters. Absolutely. Oh, it's crazy. I'm looking out of my window at the ocean, and there's a giant patch of plastic out there.
So actually, let's talk about that specific point that you just made about the shifting of the burden from localities to large-scale polluters, or vice versa. What does Tomino think ought to be done about the environmental crisis?
So this is where I find Victory really interesting. Because like you just said, in past Gundam work, it really does seem like the mouthpiece that Tomino puts environmental concern in is villains. And those villains ultimately have a plan that Tomino, I think, textually is saying is evil.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say that. You could look at that from like a writing standpoint of like he's trying to make these villains more three-dimensional, so he's pairing like a cartoonishly evil solution with a very sympathetic and empathetic drive for why they're going there. Whereas our protagonists are usually, outside of any real control of these issues, and they're just simply trying to survive. The thing that I think that Victory is really interesting in this respect is that we are kind of flipping that on its head. Zanskar does not care. Zanskar cares about the environment as little as possible. It is, it is a smokescreen enough because they want to control the Earth. They want to be the top dog in the Earth sphere, and that means they need to have control over Earth.
They literally would like to pave paradise and put up a parking lot.
Exactly. They make a little resort town or something. Whereas with our protagonists, I would never say that Uso is actively doing this to save the Earth environment. But similarly, in the ways that, a villain, they might, throw a couple of environmentalist lines off to kind of like explain why they're doing the thing that they're doing. Uso and a lot of the kind of earthbound characters that we meet are constantly doing little things that has them interacting with the environment, is showing that they live on Earth and they live with Earth. They're camping, they know how to cook, they're collecting seeds, they're, all of these like things that ultimately don't change the A-plot of Victory Gundam, but are still important characterizations. And by the time that we get to the end of Victory, I think what Tomino is saying is the correct thing to do about the environment is like sovereignty and control for the people who live there. That, you know, yes, there are people who want to go back to Earth, but ultimately the control of Earth should be left to the people who are living on Earth and living in harmony with it.
Victory was really striking to me because it seemed like in earlier Gundam shows, there's a lack of prescriptivism. There's a presentation of a number of problems, but he really resists saying definitively, and this is what we should do about it. And then in Victory, environmentalism feels more present than in many of his other shows, and it feels as though he is actually making some suggestions about what he thinks would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's another big issue that I have with early Tomino work, is this: we have a problem and the next generation will fix it, but because I'm from the previous generation, I can never say anything definitive because I can't poison you with my knowledge. And, you know, we don't have to talk about this immediately if there's more meat in the middle of Victory we want to talk about, but like, one of the reasons that Victory is one of my favorite Gundams is the fact that we actually get an ending that shows something.
Mm-hmm.
Every other ending up to this point, you know, first Gundam, everybody escapes and we leave, but then we don't see what society is like after.
Mm-hmm.
Zeta, Camille gets his mind melted and then we stop immediately there. Double Zeta, our protagonists hop on a shuttle to Jupiter and we never see what Jupiter is like. You know, Char's counterattack, a magic tea explodes into green fire, and then we kind of get a pan over the Earth for a couple of seconds, and then we never see what life is like after that.
Mm-hmm.
Victory's different in that, you know, so much of that last episode, Denouement, is just watching our protagonists live out in peace and showing what peace might look like. And I think that is, along with this, the, like, Nina, like you said, like the lack of prescriptivism, the lack of kind of like paternalism without me wanting to, as the father figure, actually say what I think you should do, is just laying it out of like, hey, this is what peace is going to look like for these characters. This is the peace that they've won. This is the life that we've agreed is good for them. And they are showing us like what a future looks like. And I feel like that's what is like the biggest kind of sea change about environmentalism with Victory compared to the previous Gundams.
There is an interview or a discussion that Tomino has with another creator where he analogizes the process of producing art and putting it out there to taking off all of your clothes and getting up to dance on stage. In this moment, he criticizes another director for doing the equivalent of that but leaving his underwear on.
Yeah.
He says, if you're gonna get up and take all your clothes off and dance on stage, take them all off and wave your bits around.
Yeah.
And I think Victory is perhaps where Tomino finally takes his underpants off and really waggles it around. And that's dangerous because when you do that, there's a risk that people might not like what they see. The more you keep on, the more mystery there is. The more other people's fertile imaginations can fill in the gaps with whatever they want to see there.
Yeah.
To my mind, I think Victory is weaker for it. The prescription Tomino is ultimately giving looks a lot like neo-primitivism. It looks like Return. It looks like the solution is we should all go back to living in small, basically pre-industrial farming communities. And that is not, in my mind, a workable solution to the environmental problems of today or of 1993.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up primitivism because, damn, is that not the solution? I think if you're keeping all the things wrapped up in your head with Victory, you know, it is important to remember that underneath that cabin is all of Wikipedia.
Right. It's not a completely sans technology world.
Yeah, but how long is that Wikipedia going to keep running? Those parts are going to run out. The power is going to run out. They are in the tailspin. They are sliding towards complete primitivism.
Yeah, and explicitly to your point, they do put all of the space noids in a big magic ring and just send it back to space. We don't see what life in the colonies is like after this, which is, I feel like, even a brief montage of, hey, what are all these psychics in the angel ring doing now, would have been really important to kind of like combat that idea of like primitivism. And I think this is, again, not to get into future works, but I know this is like a big criticism of like the final Ava Rebuild movie too. I think this might just be of this generation. It's very hard to take this generation that saw a lot of Japanese industrialization, saw a lot of Japan becoming a commercial like economy as opposed to like an industrial or farming economy, and not have that nostalgia for like the small town.
Mm-hmm.
But all I can say is you've got more Tomino Gundam to watch. So yeah. There might be a better environmentalist Gundam that you have yet to see.
That's a different guy. That's future Tomino.
Yeah.
He doesn't exist yet. He's going to be created on his couch playing Honey Pop for the next, like, or Bubble Bobble.
Yeah, he's got to go
whatever
make
the game was that he played while he was depressed. He is in the cocoon. He is in the goo. We are talking about the Tomino of 1993.
Yeah, and honestly, I am really thankful that he managed to get Victory out.
Yeah.
Because Tom, I think the primitivism stuff is a thing that you can read into previous Gundams too. Moon exists.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm glad that before he had what he thought at the time would be his ultimate break from Sunrise and Bandai, I'm glad he got out a story that has a definitive ending, that says what the ending is, at least.
And one aspect of Victory that I found super interesting and different compared to previous Tomino works is in the scenes where the kids from the Highland Solar Satellite come down to Earth and have some of their first experiences of Earth. Tomino lays out a case for basically that for us as humans, our experience of the natural world and living in it and seeing decay and death and life and growth is kind of essential for our humanity. It's part of what makes us human, and without it, we are less. We are not the same quality of human that we would be if we had a more intimate relationship with the natural world.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was just thinking about how Tomino seems very skeptical of any really large-scale environmental remediation or, environmental protection measures. If you think about it, that's kind of what the Space Noid relocation program was. That's what the possible genocide in Char's counterattack is. And the Federation's sort of large-scale reforestation projects, which only happen in the wealthy parts of the world for some reason. He's skeptical of these big projects. And I think for Tomino, because of the spiritual importance of the environment, because of how it interacts with people's souls, in his mind, or at least in the logic of the shows that he's made, it's better for a person to plant one tree with their own hands than it would be for that same person to build a tree planting robot that plants one tree every 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 10 years.
Yeah, but also to that argument, I don't think it's coming from the 90s neoliberal Bay with a brick stuff either. I don't think that Tomino is saying that we have a personal, guilt and responsibility to the ways that we pollute the world. I think what Tomino is trying to get at is some of those, old leftist, almost anarchist, school union feelings. We got to get the big government out of the way. That's the thing that's causing the problem. They're causing the pollution and then they're trying to fix it. And really, it should be the people that live in these communities that should be able to make the decisions. It shouldn't be the Franks in the shopping malls underneath the desert that are solving desertification. It should be the people of Africa that, live in the desert. They're the ones whose opinions should be consulted about this. And yet, time and time again, we see those small groups get co-opted by a bigger group. We see, the African Liberation Front get taken over by Glemmy.
Mm-hmm.
In Victory, it's very on purpose that Uso's group has to struggle against the bigger military that they're a part of, but always to a degree have some kind of autonomy. At no point does a new federation form out of the old federation that says, oh yeah, okay, we're doing this now. I think it's important that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. A lot of Gundam is about these really big problems, species-wide problems like massive wars, the looming environmental catastrophe, the political problems of the Federation. These are problems that when big institutions, when powerful people try to solve them, they always seem to do so in a way that causes massive collateral damage. Collateral damage either to people or to the environment or to something else important. But individual people can't really do anything about them unless everybody individually does something together. In the absence of any practical possibility of collective action, and when government action always seems to turn to the bad, Tomino is left hoping, praying, or at least his characters are, for widespread human spiritual revolution. A reformation of what it means to be human will just make it possible for all of us to do good actions together, and that will have a large collective effect.
I definitely think Tomino's distrust of big government is just the refrain that he constantly goes back to. The inability of people to properly communicate with each other, the ways in which language fails us. And the bigger a group you get together to do collective action, like the more miscommunication that is going to happen. And if anything, that's of these, first, how to count, 5, Tomino Gundams, I really think that is the major through. That is the actual major through line, is how do we learn to communicate with each other? How do we learn to not miscommunicate so that we can live together and live with the environment? And, sometimes it's magical spiritual connection to the earth, I guess, is what's going to do it.
One of the last topics I wanted to be sure we talked about in Victory Gundam, and we talked about this a bit during the season itself, but Victory is also really preoccupied with nuclear fallout and nuclear contamination, I think more so than previous shows.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized when we were prepping to talk about this, all of the consumer electricity needs seem to be met by solar or by individual generators, like small-scale power production.
The colonies have their solar mirrors, of course, but then we also find in Victory that the Earth is mostly powered by these solar satellites using microwave transmission to beam power down to the planet.
And so in this context, nuclear is basically only used for military applications.
Oh, yeah. I've got to be careful about what I say about nuclear right now. This is a hot button issue.
Well, I mean, one of the points that I made in the research piece I did sort of about attitudes towards nuclear at the time was that, nuclear is comparably very safe compared to other types of energy generation, but the fact that when problems happen with nuclear, they are big, dramatic problems instead of the slow poisoning of hundreds of thousands of people, produces a much different emotional reaction to those events and to nuclear itself.
Yeah. And especially, I think it is very poignant that, the only people who use nuclear power in Gundam is the military, because, I mean, this is why nuclear power basically never proceeded in America, is because of the peace movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because of, yes, on the face of it, this is for power generation, but the ways in which that would also make it easier to produce nuclear weapons, you can't ignore that factor of it. And I think especially for a Japanese creator, that has to be forefronted in that part of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
We have the benefit of having just watched Tomino's Aura Battler Dunbine. We recently did a bonus episode about it for the patrons. But in Dunbine, nuclear weapons appear and are used frequently, but are not given the same kind of importance or sinister undertones that they're given in Victory. But in Dunbine, there is aura power. Aura power is generated by people, and it's what makes the giant bug robots move. Throughout the course of the series, various characters develop the ability to generate basically too much aura power, to overload themselves on aura power, and the idea is that this is very bad. It's bad for them, it's bad for the world, and it leaves a kind of lingering corruption. the same way nuclear power is treated in Victory. So it's an interesting little comparison there, that this is an idea Tomino keeps using with sort of different set dressing. But I think the core idea for both of them is, to quote Kanye West, no one man should have all that power. That no one needs the power of a nuclear generator except to make a mobile suit or a battleship move.
Yeah.
That with solar power, you might get less power, but you get enough power if you have reasonable needs. And whether that's true or not in the real world is not a point I'm prepared to discuss. But I think that's the logic.
I actually can discuss that a little bit. So the thing that I don't want to touch on right now is small modular nuclear reactors. This is a very hot button issue in the energy space.
Yes, I imagine they get very hot indeed.
Yeah.
Cooling issues. Oh.
All I'll say about it is if you're a power monopoly and you want to make a pilot small modular nuclear reactor, the ratepayers should not have to pay if you can't make it turn on, because it's still a very nascent technology. That's the least mean thing I can say about that. But like a standard nuclear power plant right now is huge. It is a thing that could power an entire major U.S. state. And it's a massive infrastructure project to take on, and there is a high likelihood that it doesn't even complete. South Carolina has what we like to call the $3 billion hole in the ground, because they had approved a plan to build a nuclear power plant there, and the funding fell out last minute and basically stopped at the excavation point. And the ratepayers in South Carolina are still on the hook for all of the money that was spent in that. Hence the name, the $3 billion hole in the ground. And I feel like with everything else that we've been talking about with Tomino, the kind of infrastructure and government and investment that goes in to make a nuclear power plant is like everything else that he is also like railing against. It's reforestation stuff in Europe. It's, all of these other kind of like science fiction solutions that he throws into the mix that are ultimately kind of like flawed. It's incredibly prescient that he sees a world powered by small communal solar as opposed to, some kind of, massive power plant that has lines snaking out it everywhere. Yeah.
It is ironic to me that he was very prescient about solar, and I think from the position of the early 90s, imagining that solar could have that kind of impact and capacity was pretty unusual. Like solar felt like a distant, it wasn't all that effective in the early 90s, and making it effective felt like that was a long way away. And yet to still be so stuck in certain other like ideas about the environment that feel very old fashioned.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it's why in First Gundam, the entire South America arc is probably within that same idea of like, yeah, there's huge lithium deposits there. What are you going to need for massive amounts of solar energy? You're going to need battery storage. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. It is strange to see him predict so much, but still ultimately land victory with, well, we should go back to farming.
Listen, we all have our priors.
Yeah.
If any of our beliefs about the world were to be interrogated with this level of detail, they would probably collapse just as quickly or faster.
If you're lucky, you can find a video on YouTube from when I was in college comparing solar energy to hot dogs. So, yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any last points to make about Tomino Gundam, the environment, victory?
Y'all are in for a wild stretch, let me tell you.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
You got some great shows coming up.
Can you give us and our listeners a primer on what we should be looking for regarding environmentalism in upcoming Gundam? In G, perhaps. And remember, no spoilers.
No spoilers. Hey, just listen to every word that comes out of Master Asia's mouth.
I don't think that'll be a problem.
I don't even know who that is yet.
Oh, you have a research project waiting for you.
Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email hosts@GundamPodcast.com or look for links to our social media accounts on our website. And if you would like to support the show, please share us with your friends, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or support us financially at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. You can find links and more ways to help out at GundamPodcast.com/support. Thank you for listening.